Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Semrush webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about how to hack your competitors' marketing strategies. And today, we have an absolutely star-studded lineup of some of the most heavyweight SEOs I've ever seen in my life. Some serious credentials here. First up, we've got Mr. Bill Hunt. Hi, Bill. How's it going?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. And I guess I am the heavyweight here.
No, I meant intellectually heavyweight, of course. Bill is the CEO of Back Azimuth Consulting and has been in search marketing for over 20 years, specializing in data mining and understanding the searcher journey. Bill has helped some of the biggest enterprise companies in the world scale their global search programs. That's pretty impressive, Bill. You also got a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015. How did that feel to pick that thing up?
It was very surprising. I won Best Search Consultant and Lifetime Achievement. So I was at the peak of my career and the end of my career in the same evening. So it was pretty amazing.
Nice little spike there.
Yeah.
It says you're also like a PADI master scuba diver. You've been doing it for about 30 odd years. How did you get into search and scuba? Feel a little different. How did you get into that?
I was in the military. I was in the Marine Corps, and so I was a diver and then took it after, and then started teaching and yeah, like probably close to 10,000 dives around the world, and that helped in search. It actually brought me out of retirement after I sold my second agency. I found most of the sites selling scuba gear were crap, so I was trying to optimize AdWords around it to drive traffic to my blog about underwater photography, and I got sucked back into the industry.
Wow, I'm going to pick up on the Marine Corps thing later as well, because I've just recently finished a book by a guy called Jocko Willink, who I believe is also a Marine. Fascinating stories coming out of the forces. We've also got Igal Stolpner here from investing.com. He's the VP of marketing there. How are you doing, Igal?
Hey, Ross. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Doing good, thanks. Doing good. You're coming all the way from sunny Tel Aviv today, is that right?
Sunny and hot, very hot.
Sunny and hot. That's kind of like that's half of my Tinder bio right there.
It's about 40.
No.
It's about 40 specifically today, Celsius.
You can't really go outside, huh?
No.
Well, we're glad to have you.
Under the AC.
I've got your fun fact here as you played the violin from the age of 5 to 18 and then one day just stopped. Why did you just stop?
Well, I went to the military at 18 to IDF, to the Israeli army, and I never really got back to it. But I kind of miss it from time to time. I feel like it's still like part of my life in a way, but I didn't touch it for a very long time.
So both you and Bill you've got some sort of service in your background. Is that right?
Well, in Israel, we all do the army, or at least we're supposed to. So yeah, 3 full years.
See, when I read that violin thing about you, I thought that someone had told you can get girls love violin, and you tried right up until you hit 18, and then all of a sudden you realized it's not a thing. Yeah, I understand you're married with children though.
Yeah, it's a little kids.
Oh wow! How do you balance running one of the biggest websites in the world with the kids?
Well, it's tough, and the wife helps a lot, obviously, and we're getting some help from the parents. They don't live too far away. Other than that, working till late after they're asleep.
Yeah, it's the only way to go. Yeah. We've also got the wonderful Judith Lewis here, the head and founder of Cabot Consulting. Perhaps one of the most famous SEO faces in the world, and also the host and judge at every single search awards I think I've ever been to in my life, and a self-confessed chocoholic. How are you doing, Judith?
I'm very good, thank you. And hey, fun fact, I guess I should come up with a fun fact, but most people know everything about me. However, fun fact you might not know about is I actually have had to field strip an M16 rifle in my past because I spent some time in Israel and they sent us up to the Golan Heights. Oh. Not because we were naughty, but because it was required of all students in Israel at the time. And then when I tried to leave to go back home, they stopped me at the border because they thought that I was an Israeli trying to flee the draft. There you go.
Whoa.
Fun fact.
Wow.
That is, if you could drop a mic right now, that would be that would be excellent. Wow, what a story. Guys, I'm a bit dull, to be honest. I just do search stuff. I've not got any of these amazing stories. So I think I'm just gonna shut up and I'm gonna hand over to Bill, who's gonna be running us through today's presentation. So over to you, Bill. Take it away.
Right.
If we get any comments coming in, I'll jump in and out with some questions.
All right, so here we go. And let me bring up the presentation. All right, so hopefully everybody can see it. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Because I can see it. Just want to make sure everybody else can. So interesting, I guess, another fun fact of this. So of all people to be doing the actual presentation portion, it would be me, because recently on a podcast, I said I think it's pretty much a waste of time to spend a lot of time digging into competitor insights. So the folks at Semrush said, well, come on in, come tell us about some of the things that you do with this. So I really want to start out with this idea of, there's a couple really big questions when you're starting out with any kind of competitor analysis is, why do you care what they're doing? I mean, what's the reason you're going to spend time and resources on doing it? And then more importantly, what can we do with that information? And this is why I have such a sort of negativity against doing this kind of analysis, because in companies where I've been the main search person, or as a consultant, I've had to spend so much time producing insights that nobody did anything with. And so, if we're going to do something with it, great. If not, then it's just answering a question. And this was actually, I put a little copyright symbol because I have a picture, framed note that was given to one of my bosses when I was at IBM, where basically I was talking about the waste of time and said, hey, the insight's either going to tell us we're either going to suck more or suck less than our competitors. So why are we wasting our time with it? And so that's exactly how I feel about a lot of competitive insights, is that they can be misleading. So let's look at what can help us and what we can do with them. I think first and foremost, it helps us explain from an SEO standpoint this idea that we have competitors other than the people that they name, meaning that they're non-ranking. So there's a thing I'll show you a little later that we look at to find and help management understand that other than, say, if I'm at IBM, that Oracle or somebody is a competitor. Number one thing we can do is increase budget based on competitive spending or where they're focused. We can refocus IT efforts. This is probably the biggest place I use it, not to say, hey, they're using this tag or not, but that we are actually they're doing this, so we should do something like it. And identify shifts in competitor focus, because a lot of times some of the companies I work with, we do things because our competitors are doing it. I see this a lot with paid search. And so looking at where they may be shifting away from something as opposed to shifting to something can be very insightful. This is a report from 2003. This is one that I used to use when I was at IBM, this executive search scorecard where they wanted to know how we performed. And it's just a simple chart. Just rather than showing them a rank report that we rank number 1 and somebody else ranks number 3, I aggregated it against a business unit. And this was the early days of really trying to understand words related to a category. And now we've got a lot of focus around intent and categories, and people are saying the keywords are dead, but we were focusing on clusters in a category, and for a set of words for a brand or a business unit, how many of the words did we have representation for, and how many did they? And the key benefit of a report like this is it really tells you how important your content is amongst all these different classifications. And we can see competitor number 3, it's red and yellow, so they sort of don't do well across the board, whereas we're perfect in some areas and not perfect in others. And this is one of the ways I was able to use competitive insights to justify expenditures for specific content creation and content optimization. Another thing that I like to look at when I do look at it is to see changes in spend. And this was just one I put together, for this presentation. And it jumped out at me when I went into the Semrush PPC spend report. I just put in IBM, and the biggest question I want to know is why did they, why $110 million drop in spend? And this is one of these gotchas that could be, is it that they're coming into summer? Is it that they're focused on words? And this is the interesting thing, is that the keywords that they were spending money on dropped by 80%. So, we can go into this report and actually look at this and see what they've moved away from. And that's what I meant by maybe they're not as aggressive. So one of the ways that I use this move away report, if you want to think of it that way, is we can then spend there too. So maybe it's still important to us, and because they're out of the equation, we can spend money and it'd be far cheaper for us to buy those words, because now a major competitor is not buying them and pushing up the cost. Another report that I really, really like is trying to understand context of their ads. And this is two examples again from IBM, where they have 191 words in one ad group and 97 in another about automated file transfers. And so this tells me that they're really going top of the funnel. It's almost carpet bombing this category. And so the question is, now that we're, obviously they've got a lot of ads against this, especially display ads, should we, how are we faring against them? And is this something that obviously they've identified a demand for? If we have a similar opportunity, we can go after it. But just looking at some of the different keyword groups, clustering of where they're targeting, especially now with display ads, gives us a lot of insight in things that are important to them and things they're targeting. Which leads to another one that I've never heard anybody other than the Semrush team ever talk about this report, is the landing page report for display. And there's a couple things on here that I've highlighted that are important to me. So what's interesting is in Portugal, these ads, these display ads, have been running for over a year. So 519 days they've seen these ads running live. So clearly that's a persistent program. But interesting, of all the markets and all the campaigns, why is it so popular in Portugal? And so this is something we can look at from a competitive side to say, okay, maybe we need to amp up our game in Portugal, because these guys have clearly, we hope they've seen something similar to in Spanish around one of their product sets, around the cloud platforms. 503 days they've been there. And then Blue Mix, that's the third point there, it's a short-term campaign. So that's one of their specific products. We can either conquest against it. But I think this is a pretty interesting report for us to use to find insights like that. Where is something that they're focusing on? And that pivots into one of the new tools that are available, is this traffic source. Now, this is for Smirnoff. And if I was Absolute or Ciroc or one of the other vodka, I'd like to know where they get their traffic from. Now, most of the time, I don't really care about this, but this specific report helps me make a case for something else. Now, we can see here that their biggest source of traffic is referrals and direct. Very little from organic search, a fair bit from paid, and almost nothing in social. And it's very interesting for a brand like that they're not doing more in social. And so I think this is one of the things that we can show why we need to double up our efforts around social. And because in the brand that I work with does very well in organic search, we don't have to spend much in paid. But this is a pretty interesting one, that these guys feel that referral traffic, so they're probably doing a lot of partner deals as well as paid. So it's another interesting way to emphasize, what they're trying to do. And that leads me to one of the reports that I do use. It's one that I built myself called the SERP shelf space. And interestingly enough, I built this report almost 18 years ago for a large travel site that had almost 20,000 affiliates, and we wanted to see, us and them, how many of the affiliates were taking up the shelf space in Google. And looking at this really quickly, for the tier 1 words, the words that are most important to this particular client, 429 words, and we're represented 81% of the time. And for the same set of words, these aren't branded words, these are generic words, our competitors are only there 36% of the time. So that shows that what we're doing is working very well. Interestingly enough, the people that sell these products, we're only there about 50% of the time. So that opens a key question of, what is the gap? Who is not there? And if we're spending effort making sure that e-commerce partners have our products and are themselves selling them, because if somebody does a price-centric query, we want to make sure that we're there. So we know our competitors aren't doing well. We also now know our e-commerce partners are not doing well. So this gives us an idea of where we can go focus our efforts. I typically take this report, and I didn't show it from my tool set, but this is one you can do yourself. If you took the top 10 rankings, who's 1 through 10 in Google in a market, and just do a simple pivot table. And what this showed me was, of those 430 words, I looked at who do we expect to be there, so who's our biggest competitor, but I also want to see who was unexpected, meaning of the 430 words, this column here where it says unexpected one, I took out the names so you wouldn't know who this was. They're there 203 times. And we'd never really had been aware of these guys before. But yet when we look at this, who is in the top 10? Who is on the shelf? Who has representation? We found people that we never even considered before. And so these are people that we can go out to and do a variety of things with. And what we found from just that single report that I just showed you, the pivot table of top 10 positions for 430 words, many of our competitors were not represented. So that tells us that they're not either not doing well in paid or they're not emphasizing paid. And also that our e-commerce partner sites are not. And when we dug into this, we found that many times the feed we were giving them was not optimized for their particular site. So we're telling them about the product, but it wasn't matching their character links and the way they were doing this. And we ended up with 223 sites that were new to us that we could go out to do partnerships with, or links, and that. And so a very simple report that shows, who is there, gave us a significant amount of insight. And that was sort of the nexus of my mini rant, is that this one report, spending a day analyzing something that's true, what is on the shelf and what's not on the shelf of Google, gave me far more insights than knowing whether somebody ranked or didn't rank for a particular phrase. So some of the key takeaways and things I want to leave you with before we bring the rest of the group in is, sign up for their email and social media feeds. And this is an interesting thing, oh, this is search. Why would I sign up for those? Well, a lot of times these two aren't in sync, and many times things will be out in email campaigns or social media campaigns long before they end up in search. And interestingly enough, if you look at the words, that things they're focusing on in social media, they translate into keywords that can give you some really cool insights of product launches and things like that. The other thing too is, click on their ads, click on their organic listing, and follow through that channel, because they might rank better than you. We find a lot of times that they sort of completely break down when you bring people to a page. So while it might look good that they rank well, or that they're buying words, it may not be connect. The big one, don't assume that they're any smarter than you, because we all know what we struggle with. I guarantee you, from working in one vertical, I've worked with 6 of the top 10 companies in that vertical, and they all have the same problems. They all have the same challenges, and that's why we can't assume that they're any smarter than we are. They have the same struggles. And then lastly, focus on looking great on their competitor analysis. Make them work harder to say, hey, these guys are really rocking it. And so what I like to do now is just turn it back over to the wider group and then we've got plenty of time for questions. But I just wanted to plant some seeds that there's some things we can do outside of this analysis that we normally do that will, help us really, do good things in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bill. We had a couple of questions coming through there, but before we get on to the questions, like the opener to that was you were on a podcast and you said that you don't you don't actually deal with a lot of competitor analysis stuff. I really liked when we're looking at competitor stuff, the stuff they've dialed back, because that's actually quite telling. So, for example, on the display stuff, I found it fascinating. You talked about actually looking at the landing pages and seeing what products they're pushing out. Can you take that a step further and, for example, start looking at some creative leads and things like that and start working out why they're doing that? Like, I find it fascinating that you went to display and outside of search. Typically at a board level, do they care? What do they care about, and what are you kind of showing them?
Well, I think the last part, the board level, I don't think they really care. Most of the time, like when I was presenting to senior people at IBM, we had one little chart that said, that red, yellow, green chart. But the people in the middle, so the people that are allocating budget and resources, if we can show that our competitor, I think the brilliant piece is what messages were they using? What was their objective? Were they top of funnel? Were they bottom of the funnel? Were they trying to get people to sign up? Those are the things that we were looking at. When we can see the ads, and that's what's brilliant when a tool like Semrush sort of scrapes the ads, or you at least see the messaging or the landing page, it gives you an idea what they're trying to do. And so this is an interesting thing now. I look at it because of answer boxes. Are we or they answering the question? Who's answering the question people are asking? And we see this a lot. If I see that a competitor is sending people to a Gartner report or some other report and they're just using it as bait, I don't really care about those, because they're not going to convert people most of the time. They miss the intent of the query. So that's why I like to look at that and understand sort of what are they trying to do at the end, and can we use any of that? If they're doing it smartly, can we integrate it into our process?
I like that. So if they're using some sort of third-party reporting as like lead magnets or something like that, and that's on those landing pages, those can probably be discounted inside of a search strategy because it's so generic that it's something that you can duplicate, and it's not really giving them a competitive advantage. Is that where you're getting at?
Yeah, I'll give you an example, one that I was talking about this morning. So this one company was spending about $400 a click on the phrase DDoS attacks. And the paid ad was, that's a frightening number. So they were ranking number 3 organically.
I've been in gambling before, and even gambling people. Judith, I know you've done a lot of stuff in casino. Like £400 a click is
crazy. It's crazy how much people spend. And then they were sending them to an industry report on the latest trends in DDoS attacks. Now, just because you might be mentioned in that report, it's not the query that I did. So if they did happen to click through because you had a brilliant ad that didn't tell them it was going to get some goofy report, that's the kind of thing I want to discount. And that's the kind of thing that I want to make sure we're not buying. And that we are amplifying our organic resources around that, especially if there's an answer box opportunity.
So the answer box thing is fascinating. So Igal, with investing.com, you have several million pages, is that right?
You mean pages or pages on the site?
Pages on the site. The reason I'm asking is, so if you were just as Bill's explained about looking at different content sets to see what they're doing and see where the competitive advantage is, how do you do that when you literally have, I don't know how many pages you have indexed, a few million. Where do you begin to do competitor content, like competitive analysis? What's a starting point for you, and what do you care about?
So I'll tell you what, the size of the site doesn't really matter in that case for me, because eventually everything is broken into categories, into parts, into sections, according to things that make sense. And even if I speak about keywords, everything is broken into clusters. Now, the site is large, it's pretty large, and it has lots of subdomains in different languages. But if I'll just speak about the English one for a second, eventually we know exactly what works for our top competitors. And as pretty much everything in life, eventually it's a 80-20 question. Like a small group of keywords, a small group of pages are responsible for the majority of the traffic. And we maybe have millions of pages, but obviously probably the top 4,000 or 5,000 pages are responsible for most of what we generate as part of the business. So that's where we focus. And that's where we're also looking at our competitors for. So if we know that, for example, these competitors, they're doing a much better job with breaking news in finance, for example, that this is what we focus on. And then part of the competitive analysis is also to understand trends and things that we don't even understand. For instance, very recently we added a section for weed stocks, okay? And it's a new thing, relatively speaking. It's a big thing in Canada.
All the kids are talking about wheat stocks nowadays. I can't go on Snapchat without seeing it.
Exactly. So it's definitely something that we've seen somewhere else. And, you know, we had a meeting and we decided that we want to do that as well. When it comes to other instruments, it's also the same concept. Eventually, there are news instruments and tools that are responsible for most of the traffic around financial markets websites. And that's also where we're looking at.
So I suppose the interesting, it'd be fascinating to hear that, Judith, this is for you. Like, so once we've got these kind of bits of competitive information, we've aggregated them out and we understand where it's all coming from. Understand that you've worked with some of the biggest companies in the world. In fact, you've even worked with like governments to shape digital policy. How do you, I mean, insane. How do you wrap that up in a way that's understandable to stakeholders that kind of make sense for them? Because as SEO people, we've got a real tendency to just like consume the data. How do you go about actually getting that into a meaningful state?
It's got to be one of the most difficult things that anyone does, I think, in SEO, is try to take in all of that information, but put it out in a way that the C-suite or even just management who are signing off the budgets understand. So I actually have a template of slides that I take myself through where I deliberately slow down and I think, right, if I'm running a company and it's my money and, you know, money in, money out, what do I need to know? So for instance, I took in thousands and thousands of lines of data about some keywords from Semrush or Semrush, depending on what country you're from.
Represent Europe.
And I uncovered a competitor's strategy to launch a new product by analyzing the spending pattern and seeing the spending pattern change off of certain key terms, and that was them pulling back budget so that they could then spend it on the new launch. We alerted the client with 2 weeks to spare in the real estate vertical, and we managed to trump them in a number of different markets, and we won a lot of money from sales off of that. But it was because I could show the data in a graphical form and think about how the client actually wants to use it. So at the end of the day, if you own a company or if it's your business, how do you want to see that data presented so that you've got 5 minutes? You need to see all the top things within that 5 minutes. What do you need? And like I said, I've got a cheat sheet of things I take myself through to stop myself from getting too geeky with the numbers.
Yeah, I think that's good, having like a framework so you can just constantly follow it and it's kind of consistent output. The whole point on like working out what they actually need. Bill, I'm going to circle back around to you again. Before you run all this competitor analysis, so there's no lack of data here. How do you get to know if you're consulting for a business, how do you get to know what they actually need in the first place? Or are you going in typically just surveying the landscape and seeing realistically this is what they need and pushing that? Or are you interviewing stakeholders? Like, how do you get to a point where you're not being just overwhelmed by data points?
I think, you know, it's very similar to what Judith was describing in her process. You know, what do we been engaged to do? So on the data mining side, you're right, there's no shortage of data, but how do we focus? One of the first things that I do is I look at the company's annual report or their quarterly report, and it's like, what did they tell the market they were going to do? And then from there, how are they doing it? And I've been in meetings with big companies that I said, well, look, you said you're going to target Russia, but there's not a single campaign or even an SEO initiative targeting Russia. So who's doing that? And then we're able to go in and we're able to show the data that why somebody decided to target that market was because there was data to support it. So we often start with a premise, and I love the example of, like, weed stocks, because somebody was trending data, or they saw there was a data anomaly to do it. So there's usually a trigger or some sort of stimuli that tells us to look at it. One last week, we happened to see a report that came out where Cisco was going to spend like $1 billion in Southeast Asia to help grow e-commerce and internet businesses. They were doing an investment fund. And so right away, we went out and we said, okay, so what, around this IT company, what are the 6 or 8 markets that have the highest query volume? Now, they had flagged these as like tier 3, tier 4 markets, but because we were able to show that there was query volume related to this in these markets, now they're looking at, okay, how can we leverage the content we have to target these markets? And so it is usually some sort of stimuli from a discussion or a report or something like that. That helps us winnow down into an area we want to look at.
So the interesting thing, I love the whole go look at their market report. That's very, very smart, because that's clearly what they care about most of the time, especially if it's enterprise level. I remember when we were doing some stuff for one of the kind of high street chemists in the UK, and we done a sort of predatory competitor analysis, in that all of their affiliates, because they were an e-commerce store, every time an affiliate popped up, we'd be actively doing competitor research from a paid and an organic point of view. They started creeping up into paid. What we would do is we would increase spend in that area to bleed out their spend, because we knew they were small and they couldn't afford it, which is not very nice. And also, they would just end up being our unpaid keyword research monkeys, because every time they put up new landing pages of stuff we hadn't thought of, we're like, we will have that. And of course, because of the domain authority, we outrank them all. There's some really interesting questions coming in from Carlos. One of the things he's saying is, I struggle with the competitor's brand authority in the market, and no matter how much information on their market strategy I get, it seems impossible to at least achieve the same results. Now, Judith, I'm going to back this over to you. If someone's struggling with the competitor's brand authority, what should they be looking to do? And is there any data they can pull to kind of help them frame that?
So this is actually something that we looked at for that big competitor, where we identified one of their competitors pulling spend. On a search side, we looked at perceived competitors in the marketplace and then found some, as Bill has shown, unexpected ones. One of the unexpected ones, we took a look into what they were actually doing, and we were able to see that they'd gotten really smart. And instead of taking us, one of the 3 biggest in the market, head on, what they had done was pivot slightly and think like a consumer, and thought about what else consumers were using to look for properties, either for rent or for sale. And they used that to actually implement a huge campaign, both paid and organic, of this other thing that none of the top 3 had even thought about. It was all around phone area codes rather than postcodes, which is what the big 3 all owned. So sometimes, to beat the competitors, what you have to do is get really, really creative and just think, if you were a consumer, what else are you looking at? It's all keyword research, but don't just look at competitor audits. Like Bill said, they're not necessarily smarter than you. And if that little competitor had only looked at the big 3, they would have just given up. But instead, they did research around what consumers were thinking about and looking at, and then used that to optimize on. So sometimes you need to not take them head on. You need to pivot and look at what other angles you can come at and beat them at their own game. Find out what their consumers aren't finding them for, and then optimize on that.
And I think that's key. I mean, this whole being in the consideration set, we see a lot of people want to go head to head with a big brand. I saw there's a question in there about, crowdsourcing something, or getting a crowdfunding, or a brand new brand. I'm brand new. I'm not a big company, and I want to break into a market. As Judith said, what is it that people want, and what are the big guys missing? Why did you think your product has a place in the market? And if you're in the consideration set, if I want blue widgets, I didn't say I want blue widgets from a particular company. And that's why, I'm really bullish on things like answer boxes, because if you can answer that question the best and get in the consideration set, you can often knock out some of the biggest players in the world and at least be considered. Because if you're not considered, yes, they may have a bigger brand because they spent more or whatever, but if you're not even in the mix to be considered with another brand, you have no chance. And I think finding that niche and finding something they're not answering or something they're not doing, and then really attacking that can create great opportunities for you.
I want to add something, Russ.
Yeah, I was literally just going to throw it over to you. On you go.
All right. So first of all, I remember we had a discussion once about branding and like how power brand has today, generally speaking, for SEO in particular. And I think that both Judith and Bill, they touched upon probably the most important part. If you can't beat them, I'm not saying join them. I'm saying try to find a different angle, try to find a different way to get there. And the answers that Bill mentioned is a great way, because one of the problems that big brands have is the ability to pivot, is the ability to tackle everything. They are usually slow, like big ships, they just can't move so quickly. And that's exactly where the smaller businesses have all these opportunities. Now, another thing that I want to mention about branding in general is that it's also interesting to kind of understand like how powerful this branding really is from an SEO perspective. So one thing that I really like to do is also to look at the search volume of the branded searches that competitors have, because that's kind of gets you the whole idea of not only how powerful the brand is, but also what are they associated with, like what kind of items, categories, topics really this brand is really powerful for, and then obviously what it's not very known for, because all of that information in the end of the day is within it lies within keyword data.
That's really interesting, because like typically in SEO, we're all very focused on the generic, because the idea being that when we optimize things, we can actually optimize for the generic keyword. But what you're saying is focusing on what brand search is over time as an indicator of power and strength, and actually as an indicator of how difficult it might be to actually fight these guys in the SERPs. If you've got huge brand search with associated product lines, probably going to be much harder to break in.
Exactly.
So Ross, I'll give you an example of that. So I can't give their name, but I know their e-commerce company that didn't need to do TV commercials, but because a market analyst said that they did an analysis of branded keyword queries in Google, and this brand, their branded keyword queries was declining, so they marked them as something, not as rigorous of a stock. And when I saw that, it's like, well, that's stupid, because they've sort of been ubiquitous with what they do and they own the search results, but they went out and spent money on TV commercials, so in the hope that people would do a branded query to make this analyst happy. And so I think these are some of the interesting things we encounter, right? And you take a branded query and you look at in Search Console, and you'll see you might be getting a 5% click rate on your brand name, which is the first one. Well, that means 95% wanted what you do, and they wanted it from you, but they didn't click on you. So where did they go? Did they go to a partner? Did they go to e-commerce? And I think when we get into branded queries and competitive analysis, that's something we should try to look at, is for a branded query, what do they show up for? Do they got a nice, pretty set of site links, and maybe we don't? So these are some of the things that I think if we just step back and say, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? And then what can we do with this insight? And back to Judith's point is, at various levels, each one of those has a different reason for looking at this. And that's something I think it's important for us to look at is how do we package this to be consumed and used effectively?
So it's interesting that as we're talking, some guys are coming in with some questions about just as we can see competitors' information, and even people are making, like the stock market analysts are actually having impact on it based on search query. Thomas came into the chat and said, does anyone take steps to hide your SEO strategies or make them less obvious so that this type of competitive analysis is obfuscated or harder for the competition? Anyone want to jump in on that? Judith, do you want to jump in on that?
I think it's really difficult. One of the things that's beautiful about online is that I can find anything, bar your actual analytics. And, you know, there might be ways of doing that, but bar your actual analytics and doing the right things that are white hat and good. I can see and do almost anything to anyone. So favorite word of people, touch. I can touch any website, and using Semrush and other tools, I can find out whatever I want. And that means that it's very hard to hide anything from me. If you're hiding your strategy from me, you're hiding it from Google and Bing and Yandex and Baidu and everyone. So in order to be visible, you have to make your strategy visible, which means that I can see it, and so can anyone doing a competitive analysis. So it's very difficult to hide or obfuscate your strategy. You can create noise that makes it more difficult for someone like me to extract your actual strategy. But in the end, it's just data analysis.
Could not agree more. Tom, I don't know what you're up to, buddy. Trying to hide things from people. His avatar on YouTube is literally someone in a ninja mask. So we'll assume he's from the Black Hat fraternity. One of the guys, Aphilip, has asked about some less common metrics that we use to track competitors that are just as important as the better known ones. So I suppose tracking, keyword movement and things like that is pretty common. Igal, do you track anything that would be considered a bit strange or a bit odd when you're looking at your competitor stuff? So what do you track when you're looking at them?
Well, one thing that I've mentioned already is branded search. That's definitely something I always look at. When it comes to keywords, links, I think these are the obvious things, but I'll tell you a little bit about something that I call like a content audit that I'm personally doing or my teams are doing for other websites instead of for our own content, when we are kind of in the situation where a little bit stuck and we don't fully understand why someone outranks us. So one thing that I really like to do is to look at the SERPs and basically go one website by another, and we're going through a list of things. So for example, we would always write down what is the content type, and that's always something we start with. Then how often is it being updated from a freshness perspective? Topics, on-page optimization is another one. And I think that maybe my most favorite one, simply because it's a custom one, is something that I simply call satisfaction. Basically, if you understand, like if you're doing this, then you understand the topic, you understand the market, you understand what the site is all about. So that means that you are able to be in the user's shoes for a minute and basically ask yourself the question, okay, I asked this, I went one site by another through the whole list of 10 or first 20 websites. And what is my satisfaction rate from every single one of these? When I kind of get this on a list, that really helps me a lot. There's all the rest of the things like page speed, internal linking, which is, also important. But I'd say these are the more interesting ones.
I like that. We're going to call that the Rolling Stone technique. I can't get no satisfaction. I love that as a point. And also freshness is something that I don't think anyone looks at as much nowadays when it comes to the amount of content they're actually publishing over time. I suppose for you, Igal, because of investing.com, constantly, that's how you monetize through publishing and things like that. That's really important. Bill, have you seen any kind of weird and wonderful things that people are tracking internally when they're looking at their competitors? I loved your display one. I thought that was fantastic. Is there anything else that you've seen throughout the years?
One we've been doing more and more for two sites is looking at the delta between their mobile performance and their desktop performance. Because one of these verticals, about 90% of the traffic is being done on mobile. And we're finding, interestingly enough, that the bigger the brand, the less likely they're performing well on mobile for the obvious reasons, bloated sites and graphics and all that stuff. And that's an interesting one. And because we've been chasing that, we look at not only who's ranking, but similar to that satisfaction score, does it answer the question on a mobile device? And we've been able to build a business case that we need to be brutal on mobile and mobile experience. And it's allowed us to demonstrate that none of our branded competitors are even on the first page for about 250 words, because in mobile, because they've not done the things we've done. And had we not done them, and we can often say, well, they didn't do it. But when we show who is there and who's replaced them in mobile, that's been a big one. And then the second one is same thing that Igal talked about with clusters. And I showed that one screenshot that if there's 200 words that represent mutual fund investing, let's say, how many of those do we or our competitors have representation for? And because if we're not there and we're not considered, and they are, I can use that to motivate people to create the content or optimize it. So those are two that I think are underused, and given the way Google's going to searcher intent, clusters, people also searched, as well as mobile satisfaction, are things we should definitely start to look at more and more.
I love the delta between mobile and desktop. Sorry, Judith, on you go.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I absolutely agree with that. And I've got a weird one.
Oh, of course you do. Of all the people that have a weird one, it would be you. All right, let's hear it.
I don't know how many people are tracking this, but I use Semrush to track features in the SERPs and who's owning the featured snippet. The reason I did this is because a friend of mine who's had to become a client, he found that all of the sudden he was getting a lot less traffic, and there was no reason for it. There'd been no updates, nothing happened. We thought maybe it was a SERP update, but what it turned out to be was the featured snippets more than doubled in number for things he was ranking number 1 for. So that number 1 ranking suddenly slipped below the fold, and affiliates were taking the featured snippet position. So what had happened was, effectively, although he didn't drop from his number 1 position, he dropped because of featured snippets. So the result of that is, so for him, I now track SERP features. So are there images? Are there videos? What's the featured snippet? Who has the featured snippet and why? Is it a table? Is it a paragraph? Is it a list? And what does he need to do in order to grab that back from whoever has it, the Telegraph, an affiliate, another website that's similar to him? So that's something that I think if you're an FMCG or B2C, it's very, very important. But also, Igal, for finance, it can be helpful when people are doing queries that may then down the line convert into customers.
Absolutely.
But this, that's the thing we talked about the other day. Another one of my little pet peeves was how many SEOs never look at the search results? We do everything through the lens of a tool report, and we never actually do a search in the search engine to see what shows up. And when we look at that, we either find that, yes, we're still number 1 in organic, but we're not ticking the box either for an answer box or a featured snippet. And that's why, going back to device type, or little things like I had a client that came to us and said, we did an answer box report and they didn't show up anywhere for their product plus specifications. And the reason was they had this really funky, aesthetically pleasing page, but the people were beating them were just simply, click traffic people that put the specifications in a simple text box. And we said, well, that's your data. Let's put it in a text box. And then as soon as they made the design change to have it in a proper HTML text, table, they got 90% of the answer boxes for their product plus specification. And so, again, had we not looked at the results, said, okay, that's why, because they wanted specifications. This site had it brilliantly laid out. In fact, Google was making it where nobody even had to click through. So we had to architect the spec box so that it would still encourage clicks rather than putting all the lines there. So that's why I think, the human eyes need to come back into the equation in the brain, as opposed to just relying. Let's use the tools to give you that insight that, hey, the answer box or the featured snippet changed radically, and then go in and use your brain to figure out what we can do to sort of conquer that positioning.
As an aside, just as we're talking about answer boxes and things like that, I would love to hear if we think, and it's not directly to do with competitor analysis, if they're a good thing or a bad thing. Recently seen a piece that came out from SparkToro and JumpShot that said that 48% of all searches do not contain any clicks outside of a Google property because of answer boxes and instant answers. But as an SEO community, especially if we're doing client work, any win is like anything that we can get as a win for them is a win. So we're selling ourselves down the river short term as clicks are being eroded. Now, I've not seen any big studies at scale, and a lot of people have got mixed messaging about it. Are you guys actively going for that stuff? Do you like it? Do you think it's a good thing, or do you think it's a bad thing?
With regards to 0 clicks, you're still getting brand awareness. So that featured snippet or that top of the page, that's still getting you the brand awareness. So if someone, let's say we're talking about cameras, if I've got as Canon a featured snippet at the top of the page, or as an affiliate for Canon, I've got a comparison that demonstrates that Canon is the best camera. Somebody walks into a shop, buys a Canon as a result of that. That's still a win for the company. It's harder to attribute to SEO as a channel, and it means that channel attribution becomes much more difficult and much more hairy, especially for SEOs. But if we take channel attribution out of it, then having that search result and getting that peace of mind so that we're front of mind when people make the choice in store, that's still a win.
Ross, I really think that it's crucial for us to make sure that clients, companies, CEOs, they get the fact that Google is changing. And if yesterday you were getting 10,000 clicks a day for page X, it doesn't have to be the case tomorrow. And Judith is absolutely right. So brand awareness in this case is pretty much all we're left with. But it's a change in environment. It's just something that we need to, to work on. You work with clients, Ross. I'm sure that you see that all the time. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I think we all feel like it's currently hurting us. I've been seeing it for at least 5 years. 5 years ago, you would go and type on Chrome, let's say Apple stock, and you don't even have to go to position 0. You get the price at the level of the URL form. And, it's part of the changes that we're going through.
But I think that's the key, right? Is it what's the context of the query? So like things that I hated, like what time is it in London? I don't need to go to a page that tells me the average shoe size of people in London is X and the weather and time of date and the education. I don't need all that noise where I have to hunt for it. Just give me the damn piece of data. So if your livelihood was, producing all that crap to get traffic, then your days are definitely numbered. But and so what else do you do? Now that leads to, I found over 100 companies have Google warning statements now in their financial statements saying, hey, Google's materially changing. So the free traffic we were getting, we may now have to pay for, and some companies are saying as much as $3 or $4 million or more a quarter to make up for that gap fill. So, if Igal was getting all these queries because people wanted the stock symbol, for Apple, and that goes away, and that's a significant portion of their traffic. Well, what else can we leverage? And then I think one thing a lot of these reports don't do is they couch it to say broadly the number of clicks went down. Now, if you were disintermediated, what can we do to make that up? Can we do, as Judith said, can we find alternative queries? And I'll give you an example that I talked about at a conference from Absolute. Our page, sort of drinks or cocktails with vodka, was bringing a crazy amount of traffic. And then as things started to shift to mobile, traffic went to that page went down significantly, but we still ranked number 1. And what happened is Google put a slider at the top of the page so you could scroll through and see all the drinks with vodka. Well, we just simply put a list element on the page, and so the same ranking page, we provided the images that populated that scroll for drinks with vodka. Now, it didn't change the traffic to my vodka page, but it did increase exponentially the traffic to the individual pages. And so we had to build a report that would show that while we lost half of our traffic to drinks with vodka, we more than gained it back into the individual drink pages, because now they're in a scroll. It matched the user's scenario, and it encouraged people to click when we changed the drink images to match what Google was showing. So yeah, it sucked for a while, and my marquee page, I had to take the beating over why it dropped. But instead of whining about it, I analyzed what was replacing it and what impacted it, and then affected change. And again, I think this is where data helps show that I need to reshoot, 100 images in high res, and we need to put this list element in place, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think a lot of times people hear this and they panic instead of stepping back and saying, well, what can I do? And a lot of times they've gotten away with some of this laziness for a long time. And we need to work harder or think more strategically about how to capture that shelf space, and go beyond just some of the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, the kind of laziness epidemic is definitely a big one in whining when Google changes things. We've been I do it every time. We've been saying SEO is dead since the dawn of time, because we just whine when Google changed things. Now we've been kind of talking enterprise level about some big kind of sweeping things, because everyone in this kind of chat has had some pretty interesting experiences at the kind of top of industry. But Mark Wilcox has asked, how do you change your competitor research style when working with a small business or even a local business? So does anyone have any experience with small and local and how they would change it up a bit?
I wouldn't change it all. It's exactly the same. It's just we get caught up in this big company, little company. So what we look at is exactly the same. There is exactly no difference between the two. It's usually who you're reporting to, not what you do.
And if you think about it, you've got local shop for local people from Legal Gentlemen. It's a local shop. We're still researching who are our competitors. What are they doing? How are they interfering with our ability to cut through the noise and be seen by our customers? So ultimately, our goal is to be seen by customers and to be chosen, whether it's online or offline. Our goal is to be chosen. My friend who had to become a client because of that change, he's small. He's like 3 people, a warehouse, and a website. There's no offline shop. There's nowhere that someone can go and buy his things. He's a reseller of a product, or a product line, I should say. And so what I did with him was the exact same thing that I would do with a big business. The big difference was walking into a meeting with my normal, okay, right, here's the strategy, and you guys implement. And they actually just did not have the skills or the manpower to implement the strategy. So I've had to augment there. But that's the only difference, is the manpower wasn't there, that the analysis had to be the same.
Now, I think if I seen your same friend and they asked for some advice, Judith, if you said they were 3 men, a warehouse, and a website, that sounds like a bluegrass band. So I'd encourage them to pivot into that. Guys, we're getting towards the end of everything. For everyone watching at the moment, I just want to make you aware that you're going to all receive an email if you've signed up, and you're going to get a bonus inside of that email. You're going to get a trial code for the traffic analysis tool from Semrush, as well as a how-to guide. So if you're watching, please look out for that. Just before we go, guys, I'd love to just go around. If they want to ask any more information or find you on the web, we'd love to know where that is. So Bill, where can we find you around the web?
I'm at back-azimuth.com.
Excellent. And Igal, where can we find you?
So first of all, people can email me. Can you hear me, by the way? Because
yeah.
I have another problem with the camera. People can email me at igal@investing.com, or find me on Twitter at igalst. Yeah, I'm there.
Excellent. And Judith?
Well, I'll find you first, I'm sure. But if you're looking for me, you can follow me on Twitter at Judith Lewis. You can pop over to my website at decabit.com. Or, if you happen to be in a chocolate shop, I'm probably there too.
Awesome, awesome. And if anyone is looking for the recording of this webinar, it will be on the YouTube channel afterwards. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time, and have a lovely evening or morning, depending on where you are in the world.
Thank you, Ross.
Great, thanks.
Thank you so much, Ross.
Take care.